When you think of Whitesnake, what pops into your head? I know what I think of. I think of 1987 and that huge album, MTV, heavy rotation, Tawny Kitaen doing cartwheels on the hood of a Jaguar, big hair, big choruses, big everything. But if you were following this band before that, that wasn't really Whitesnake. Not really anyway. For almost a decade, Whitesnake was a gritty, heavy blues-based rock band built out of the wreckage of Deep Purple. You had Bernie Marsden and Mickey Moody on guitars. You had John Lord on keyboards and Ian Pace on drums. Now, they were massive in Britain and Europe, but in America, they were barely a blip on the radar. So today we're going to talk about how one record company executive, he looked at this traditional blues-based rock band and he took it completely apart and rebuilt it into a multi-platinum machine. This is not a story about guys jamming in a garage. This is a story about corporate leverage, $3 million in debt, a collapsed septum, and one of the strangest recording credits in rock history. So to understand this, you have to understand the man John Kalodner. Now, I've mentioned his name a few times in previous videos I've done, but John Kalodner, he was a A&R man at Geffen Records. Now, A&R stands for Artist and Repertoire. So on paper, they sign the talent, they sign the bands. But in reality, guys like Kalodner, they shape the record and the bands. He picks the producer, he picks the songs, and sometimes he picks the band. So Kalodner, he had what they called in the industry a golden ear. He knew what American radio wanted before American radio even knew. Now here's David Coverdale's situation in the mid-'80s. He's living in the US, he's going through a rough divorce. He's been touring Europe on European type budgets for years, and the math has stopped working for him. He's watching a generation of American radio bands outsell him without breaking a sweat. Here was Geffen's pitch and Kalodner. Sign properly for America, for the American market. Write a record for American FM radio. Keep John Sykes as your guitar player and accept everything that comes with the marketing machine that we're going to set up for you at the record label. Now, Sykes, he was already there. He joined right around the time of Slide It In 1984. I mean, he's one of my favorite guitar players of all time. At that time, he was young, aggressive. He was phenomenal. He had come out of Thin Lizzy to join Coverdale in Whitesnake. Now, Kalodner's advice wasn't to hire him. It was to hold on to him. Everything else was on the table. It was the spring of 1985. You had Coverdale, you had Sykes, you had bassist Neil Murray, and they moved into a rented villa on the French Riviera, and they started writing material for the next album, which would be the self-titled 1987 album. One of the things they did go back into the back catalog of Whitesnake, and they pulled out a song called Here I Go Again. So that song, it already existed. It came out in 1982 on the album for Whitesnake, Saints and Sinners. And Coverdale was never really crazy about how it turned out. It was kind of like a slow, organ-driven, it was sort of mournful. He wrote about his marriage that was falling apart at the time in that song. So what they decided to do is take that song, they knew it had potential, they pulled it apart. Out went the Hammond organ, in came the synthesizers, making it more modern sounding. The guitar volume went up, bigger drums, and they changed one word in the lyrics. Like a hobo, I was born to walk alone, became like a drifter, I was born to walk alone. And why did he do that? Well, because American audiences knew what a drifter was, apparently, and that's the whole makeover in one word. They dug even further back then, besides that as well. Coverdale has said that he had the seed for the Still of the Night song on an old demo cassette he found going through his mother's house after she passed away. And it was a piece he and Ritchie Blackmore had messed around with back in the Deep Purple days. He even joked about it that he changed it so much that Blackmore's got nothing to worry about. So from there, they moved to Los Angeles, and they auditioned drummers, and they landed Ainsley Dunbar, who had previously been in Journey. Now, after that, they headed to Vancouver to start cutting the tracks for this album. And that's when the friction starts almost immediately. Now, John Sykes, who's very strong-minded at the time and in general, he wanted a very specific guitar sound, and he went out and got it. He pulled in a young engineer at Little Mountain Sound Studios up in Vancouver named Bob Rock, who was a friend of Coverdale's, who'd just come off working on the Slippery When Wet album with Bon Jovi. And Sykes got exactly that tone he was looking for with Bob Rock. And that matters because Sykes wasn't a hired hand executing someone else's vision. He was pushing this record hard in a hard rock direction. And he had the chops to back it up. Now, there was also a problem sitting underneath the whole thing. So as most of us know that have listened to David Coverdale over the years, from all the way back from the 70s and Deep Purple, he's more of a blues-oriented singer. That's his DNA. And Coverdale, he'd even said outright that Sykes was not a fan of the blues. He went so far as to say he hated the blues. But he had to work within those parameters and sort of smuggle it in as electric blues instead. So you've got a blues singer writing songs for a guitar player who doesn't want the blues in them. That's a slow leak right there. And then the next thing was Coverdale, his body gave out. In the spring of 1986, his sinus infection that he was fighting at the time came roaring back and it collapsed his septum. He needed surgery. And he told People magazine, he was very specific about this, that it was non-drug related and it was a deviated septum caused by the illness. I know a lot of people have said that that's BS. It was coke related. David says otherwise, so that's what we're going with. So rehab for him was somewhere around 6 to 8 months in length, and he wasn't allowed to sing at all, nor could he. He was reportedly given only a 50-50 chance of ever singing again. And he said since that flat out, he thought he was done. So, you know, you sit with that. A guy who earns his living and passion using his voice, and he can't sing. I mean, he's roughly $3 million in debt to his record company, and that's his number. Almost $3 million in the hole after 2 years with no touring income. And the record's not even finished. And here's the part people seem to gloss over. For roughly 8 months, Coverdale wasn't even in the studio, but Sykes was. And so those guitars, they sounded big. They were enormous. The drums are enormous. And the singer, he's recuperating at home in the hospital, and he can't make a sound. Coverdale has even said he was mortified by what he believed was happening behind the scenes. He put it about as plainly as a man could put it, that he received no support from Sykes during that period, and that John Sykes, according to David Coverdale, did everything he could to take advantage of him being compromised. So David Coverdale's accusation is that Sykes, along with producer Mike Stone, went looking for another singer to finish the album. Coverdale described trying to make peace with a specific nightmare. And that nightmare was that he could still write, he could still produce, but somebody else may end up singing those songs. Now, here's Sykes' version. I'm going to give it to you because you deserve both sides of the story. Sykes claims that he doesn't think Coverdale was really sick throughout that entire period. He believes it was nerves, and that the man used every excuse he could to find a way not to get behind the microphone. He also said nobody ever told him he'd been fired from Whitesnake, that he found out by asking John Kalodner what was going on with the situation. And here's the uncomfortable wrinkle in this whole story. Coverdale has admitted that he developed a mental block about singing during this stretch of time. So Sykes wasn't really imagining that Coverdale was stalling. He might have just read the wrong cause of the whole thing. But he does think about what that does to a session. A guitar player convinced that the singer is dodging him, that's not a great feeling. I mean, the tracks are finished except for the song, the vocals, and the label is $3 million deep into this whole thing, and they're getting nervous. There's no end in sight. So what does a guy start thinking about if you're in Sykes' situation? He starts thinking about finding another voice. So by the time Coverdale was cleared to sing, this had become a 14-month project across studios in Vancouver, Toronto, Nassau, Bahamas, and Los Angeles, with a revolving set of producers. Now, Coverdale did try cutting vocals with producer Ron Nevison at first, but those didn't work out. Then Keith Olsen came in, and Olsen got him over the hump with a trick. So Keith Olsen asked Coverdale to sing Still of the Night, and he told him he wasn't being recorded. It was just a run-through. No pressure. Now, Coverdale said he almost threw up anyway, and that's what is on the record. That vocal, the one everyone knows, is from a man who was told that he might never sing again, who was being lied to by his producer so he wouldn't freeze up when the red light went on. And when Sykes found out Coverdale was in Los Angeles mixing the record without him, he got on a plane from England. By Sykes' own account, Coverdale was at the studio and it turned into a shouting match. Sykes says that David Coverdale hid in his car and then drove away. Either way, whoever is telling the truth, the bottom line was that was the end. When the vocals were done, the band was gone. Sykes was out. Neil Murray, he was out. Ainsley Dunbar, he was out. So the guys who wrote and played on one of the biggest hard rock records of the 80s were unemployed even before that record hit the stores. And that left John Kalodner and David Coverdale with a problem. They have an expensive finished album and no band to put on MTV, which was so important at that time. So they cast a band. They didn't hold open jams or auditions. They looked for 4 guys who looked the part and could play. So they brought in Tommy Aldridge on drums. You had Rudy Sarzo on bass, straight out of Quiet Riot. You had Adrian Vandenberg on one guitar and Vivian Campbell on the other guitar, fresh out of Dio. So Coverdale, he had a funny nickname for this group of musicians. He called them the Vid Kids. And here's the detail that almost everyone gets wrong. Adrian Vandenberg actually does play on that record. He plays the solo on the album version of Here I Go Again. So that solo you hear in the video is actually still Vandenberg from the recordings. And David had been trying to recruit him since 1980 to join him in Whitesnake. Now, Sykes reportedly didn't want to touch a re-recorded song from an old era, so Vandenberg got that call and did the job. So the 4 guys in those videos, one is genuinely on the record, barely, one. That's the only one. And but it gets weirder. So months after the album was already out and selling, Geffen decided they wanted an even more radio-friendly version of Here I Go Again. So Coverdale went back in a 3rd time. All new session players. Dan Huff on guitar, Denny Carmassi on drums, Mark Andes on bass. Those 2 guys from Heart, by the way. Bill Cuomo and Don Airey on keyboards. That version, the one that gets straight to the riff with about 20 seconds of intro so a DJ can talk over it, that's the version that went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. So think about that. The biggest hit of David Coverdale's life features almost nobody from Whitesnake. Not the studio band, not the video band, a different guitar player from either one. Then there's Coverdale himself. Dark-haired blues singer walks out, MTV rock god with frosted hair walks out. And the videos, you had director Marty Kalodner. He walks into a meeting at Coverdale's house to discuss an upcoming video, and he sees the woman that Coverdale is dating lounging out by the pool and says, "That's her. That's the Whitesnake woman." There was reportedly a model that Kalodner had already lined up. The name that comes up often is Claudia Schiffer before anyone knew who she was. But she was out. Once Kalodner saw Tawny Kitaen, she was in. So that decision alone is probably a worth in the vicinity of $10 million. So was it a sellout? Fans of the old Whitesnake, they'll tell you absolutely it was a sellout. They'll tell you Coverdale took a real band and turned it into a product. But look at the scorecard. The album hit #2 on the Billboard 200 album chart. It only missed #1 because U2's Joshua Tree was parked there at #1. 8 times platinum in the United States and over 25 million copies sold worldwide. You had Here I Go Again hit #1. Is This Love hit #2. And here's a fun one. So Still of the Night, which the song everyone thinks of as the definitive Whitesnake track, that only got to #79 on the Hot 100 chart. It was not it was a rock radio hit. It wasn't a pop radio hit. So the ballads did most of the heavy lifting. Coverdale went from $3 million in debt, in his own words, to richer than he ever was in Deep Purple in the span of about 3 months. John Sykes, on the other hand, he went off and formed Blue Murder, and he and Coverdale didn't speak for years. Kalodner didn't treat Whitesnake like a sacred brotherhood. Instead, he treated it like an asset. He stripped it, repainted it, dropped in a new engine, and he sold it. And it worked so well that 40 years later, most people still think the guys in the video made the record. So let me know in the comments, do you take the old bluesy Whitesnake or the 1987 juggernaut Whitesnake? And be honest, when you hear Here I Go Again in your head, which version is playing? The one from Saints and Sinners or the one from 1987? So if you like this kind of story, my book, Near Miss Alternate Histories of Rock's Greatest Personnel Decisions, it's out on Amazon right now, and I put the link in the description below if you're interested in taking a look at it. So if you're not already subscribed to this channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit like, share it with someone that is a Whitesnake fan, and I'll see you in the next one.